Okay, we're all here. It is 1:05 p.m. On Thursday, the 28th. I'd like to call this meeting to order as quickly as possible so we don't lose everybody. And we'll do our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
of the United States of America and to the republic
Public
for which it stands, one nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and
justice
justice
for
for all.
all. Thank you, Carl, for having a flag that we could all pledge to. We didn't have a flag. That's very good. Also welcome at this meeting is David Lee, and I see Suzanne Helchowski. And I guess the rest of us are the entire board is here. Wonderful. Susan, I don't mean to overstep, but I think you've got a full roll call here.
But that's Charlie you're overstepping.
Oh,
actually.
excuse me. You know, I do this every time. We need to change on our agenda the fact that the secretary is Charlie, not Susan, so that I don't keep messing up. Charlie,
Yeah.
we're okay? Roll call's okay?
roll call is fine, but you did a roll call, so you got everybody here, right, Lisa?
Leslie, yes, I think we do. Looks to me like we got a full house. Okay. The first item on the agenda is the acceptance of minutes. Did you all receive your minutes?
Joe, did you
Okay.
send out?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, there was
I don't-
one file, but it had all the minutes in it.
Okay.
There were
Okay.
9 of them.
Yes, these are the minutes of two different types of meetings. One is the joint MOA committee meetings, and the other is the estuary district MOA committee meetings.
All right. So Charlie, this is on you to ask for acceptance of minutes.
Which you can do all of them together, Charlie.
Yeah, I have a motion to accept all the minutes of the MOA committee, of the joint committee, and the ETD group alone. Can I get a motion for acceptance of those minutes?
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion? None heard. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None heard. The vote passed. All the minutes.
Tim Grizzle needs to abstain. I don't think I was present for those meetings.
Who's that, Neil?
No,
Tim Grizzle, Lime.
Okay. So minutes are accepted.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, then let's move along. The next
Okay.
item on the agenda is the discussion of the MOA with possible action. And I will turn this over to the chair of our MOA committee, Susan Tyler.
Okay, I would like to make just a few summary comments before we get into discussion on this. This document was recommended for approval to each of the boards by the joint MOA committee. For estuary, you probably know that has included Joan, Angus, and myself, with Leslie sitting in on a number of meetings. For Middletown, it was Laura Francis, who is the first select woman of Durham, Ed Bailey, the first selectman of Middlefield, and Beverly Lawrence, who is the Middletown rep. We established, we've had almost 10 meetings at this point, and we started in mid-November. We established guidelines at the beginning of the process for how we were going to do this. And the overriding agreement was that we were going to approach this not as us and them, but as us. I'm happy to tell you that all decisions made on this MOA have been unanimous. We agreed that if an item was important to one district, the other district would support it, and vice versa. That's the end of my kumbaya moment. There were no previous agreements to act as a template for this. We will be the first consolidation of a public transit district in Connecticut. So we basically had to develop everything on our own from scratch that was unique to our situation. You'll notice that the documents no longer refer to this as a merger. This was pointed out by by the Middletown attorney rather, because the statute, the Connecticut statute under which we operate does not permit, quote, a merger. And you may recall that the recommendation from the transit study was that the structure of estuary remain in place and that Middletown would dissolve and its member towns would vote to join estuary. So the term merger has been replaced in all of these documents with the term expansion, intended to mean the Middletown towns would join us, and then at some future point, additional towns, if they opted to, could also join us. Our respective attorneys for both districts reviewed this in great detail. Our committee accepted all of their recommended changes, and I think we ended up with a stronger document. Our main goal was how do we protect the districts and ensure funding, yet provide flexibility, which we think we're going to need. This is a fluid operation. There are a lot of moving parts, and there are things that are going to pop up, and we didn't want to constrain ourselves too specifically in this document. If DOT was not involved in a particular issue, the issue was not included in the document. For example, our attorneys are now working on a shared staffing agreement between the two districts. That is not included in the document. It does not concern DOT, it concerns how our two districts relate to each other. Our major concern was how to protect the districts if we don't get the funding that was promised in the study. I think we all agree that the consolidation can't work without the additional operational and capital funding. That without the funding will be a large understaffed district limping along instead of two small districts doing reasonably well by themselves. The schedule that is contemplated in these documents is that we would send DOT this MOA, if it's approved by both boards, next week. We are hopeful that DOT will be able to sign it by March 1st. Maybe wishful thinking given the speed with which things don't occur there, but that's our goal. We are hoping that the TODs for new staff that we've requested will be available on or before March 1st. We have a land acquisition for both districts contained in the MOA to occur by September 1st of this year. There will be a transition period from now until approximately July of 2022, at which point we anticipate the operational expansion of the two districts would occur with capital and various wind down facilities after that. The negotiating process that we've decided on as a joint group is that any negotiation that needs to take place between us and DOT on the MOA will be a small group consisting of Laura Francis, Joe Comerford, and myself. We will work with DOT. We will bring issues back to the respective joint committee and to the full board as necessary. And lastly, I do want to thank Joan, Angus, Leslie, Joe, and Dave for all the time that they committed to this project over the last short period. So having said that, and again, I wished we had been able to give everyone more time than you had to go over this, but the time is of the essence because DOT has told us that they will not approve the funding for these new positions we want until they see the MOA. So we fast tracked it. We know it's not a perfect document, and anybody who has suggestions today that will improve it, we'll gladly accept those. So having said all that, Joe, do you, Angus or Joan have anything else to add before we start discussion?
No. Well said.
No, I think you said it perfectly.
Okay, so I'll open it up for discussion.
This is Noel, through the chair. Can I make a comment,
Absolutely.
Leslie? First of
that-
all, I think it's an extraordinary piece of work for all of you that worked on it. You are to be commended. It's very straightforward. I want to confirm two things, and this is consistent, and I'm sure Agnes knows what I'm talking about in our town. Whenever we approve agreements, at least in Westbrook, we make sure there's been a legal review. Can I assume, therefore, that the attorneys from both towns have reviewed this document, and if so, have their comments been incorporated into it? That's my first question. My second question is the following. I notice there's no financial implication in there about staffing and so on, but I understand from talking to Joe yesterday, that's to be included at a later date. Can someone respond to my two questions, please?
Regarding your first question, Noel, I think you might not have heard my comments, which is that, yes, both attorneys have reviewed the document, made suggestions. We met with them and incorporated all of their suggested changes for both sides. With regard to the staffing or the funding for staffing, there are a number of references in the MOA and tables in the appendices that relate to the amount of money that is necessary. The document requires a commitment from DOT to provide that additional operational funding. And the TODs for the two positions that we are asking for, we hope would come from DOT once they see that this MOA and that we are serious about proceeding.
It's just
Thank you,
from
Susan.
my
Good
discussion
answer.
with Noel too, one of his questions was about the sharing of employment. And that's where we're saying that that's a side agreement
Yes,
that we will be negotiating.
right.
But as Susan mentioned earlier, since ConDOT is not part of that, we are going to do that amongst each other and not involve them.
Thank you both for your answers.
Other questions?
I have one comment and one question. I guess under the memorandum of agreement, it still references the word merger under intent.
It does?
Second line,
That's the lawyer's language, Carl. It says, and effect the equivalent of a merger.
I guess at the COG meeting, there was some conversation that there was the turn of a phrase was important. So if it's got an attorney's blessing on it, I guess I'm fine with it.
That's the way he got around it.
Then the other question I've got is more one of process. So this will go from this group up to the DOT, and I assume the DOT is going to have some issues, and then there's going to have to be a further negotiation with the department.
Correct. There has not been any negotiation with the department at this point, other than the discussions we've had with them about the new staff we wanted to put on board as quickly as possible. So yes, and that's where that negotiating process will come into place. And nobody on the joint MOA committee will not make any concessions or agreements without checking back with the full board, depending, of course, on how significant it is.
Susan, I just wanted to reinforce what Noel said. Plus, I think the phraseology is so directed to the point without excessive words. I hate excess words because lawyers love them. And I love how you have made it a concise and made it easier for us to follow each step. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions, concerns, or more importantly, suggestions on how we can make this better?
Susan, I have one observation which might include a question. On page 3, under D, there's a statement that DOT further agrees that there shall be no diminution of state or federal funding. And my question or comment is DOT in a position, or how are they in a position to make that kind of an agreement on behalf of the federal government?
Charlie, that's a really good question, which our attorney brought to our attention as well. There are federal funds over which DOT has control. This is intended to apply to those. We understand that the federal government is not a party to this agreement, and therefore we can't compel them to do anything. This is the kind of provision that DOT perhaps may ask to be excluded. We opted to keep it in because if we can get it in, that would be great. But what we're really referring to here are those federal funds that DOT actually controls the allocation of. Good catch,
What-
though.
Tim Griswold, could that not be stated
Yeah.
in that
Yeah, the-
paragraph, just to reference funds that are within their control, just to make it a little tighter?
It could be, Tim, and the committee discussed that and essentially decided to leave it the way it was and use that as a fallback position.
I would like to just jump in, Susan, before, it sounds like everybody's winding down their questions. I would like to reiterate that this was an absolutely magnificent undertaking. And that as a small board, we should be absolutely amazed at how this was produced and the time frame in which it was produced. And under Susan's direction, I don't know how we could have done this without Susan, quite frankly. I don't know how anybody could have done it. David, you've been a tremendous guide to get us through this correctly. And it seems to me during this process, I don't think there was a single T or I that wasn't discussed, dotted, or anything. And I look forward next week to signing, along with Ed Simolis from Middletown, signing the cover letter that's been generated and getting this thing up to the commissioner and the other related DOT personnel.
Leslie, thank you for your kind words. That reminds me to bring up one other thing. The MOA will not be signed by the districts. The districts will be sending this document via a transmittal letter that will be signed by Leslie and Joe Simolis, the respective chairpersons. For the reason that this is a three-way agreement and we realize there are going to have to be some negotiations. So the agreement itself is not going to be delivered as a signed agreement. Only the cover letter will be signed, but the cover letter states that both districts are in 100% agreement as to the content. Other questions, suggestions? Joe, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered everything.
Okay. If there
Uh,
are no, oh, I'm sorry.
Susan, a question.
Yes,
When
no.
we're going to take action later today, but what I want to ask before we do that, when we take this action today, I would like to know what the next steps are going to be and the timeline.
Okay. Middletown is meeting also this week to formally approve the MOA. Once both districts have approved it, it will be sent to DOT next, or it could be tomorrow, but most likely early next week. We are hoping that the document will be signed by the three parties by March 1st. There are some staffing consequences and implications that Joe will talk about a little later in the agenda. But in addition to that, we are anticipating that we will receive the TODs for those new staff by March 1st, that the transition period for the consolidation will be from now until roughly July of 22. We expect the operational consolidation to occur around July of 22, with a capital facility completion after that. So I anticipate, Noel, that negotiations between the districts and DOT will take place in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Hopefully not longer, but we can't tell. Is that
That's a great timeline. Thank you. Great timeline.
okay? Any other comments or questions? Okay, I would like to ask for a motion as follows. Suzanne, if you need this, I can send it to you in writing. To approve the memorandum of agreement regarding the expansion of the Estuary Transit District as recommended by the Joint MOA Committee of Middletown Transit District and Estuary Transit District. A motion.
So moved.
Second,
Okay. I didn't catch who those were. I think Charlie was the second. I don't know who was the first.
Angus was your first.
Oh, was it
Angus and Charlie.
Okay. Further discussion. Okay, there being none, all in favor,
Aye.
Aye.
opposed, abstain. The motion is carried unanimously. Gotta love it. Okay, thank you. If any of you have concerns or late breaking ideas, it's not too late. You know, even after we send it, there'll be negotiations. So don't hesitate to let us know if that is the case. I don't think, Joe, or we need an executive session at this point.
I don't think so.
Okay. The next item is staffing discussion with possible action. I wanted to just give you two cents on that. We have received the TOD for the new maintenance director, and Joe will fill us in on the status of that. DOT did indicate, as I mentioned, that they would not release TOD for the two new positions we asked for, which is an HR position and a grants and procurement position, until they saw the MOA. We did, however, the joint committee authorized Joe to use our own existing funds to begin advertising for those positions, which he did do a while ago. We are also recommending to the wards the addition of a new position of special project manager that will be paid for equally by both using existing funds. And Joe will talk a little bit more about that. So with that, I'll turn everything over to you, Joe.
Okay. Well, I'll start with kind of where we are in the maintenance position. We had a candidate that we had made an offer to, he accepted, and then things changed in his personal life and wasn't able to accept it. So we're back to the search again. I actually had an interview at noon today, which is why I was a couple minutes late getting on here. So we've got some more applicants, and it was the first interview since we've resumed interviewing. And we have a few more set up this week and into next. So hopefully by the end of next week, we will be able to make an offer to another candidate. But Condot has already provided the funding for that. So that one, we're just got to find that right person and get them started. As Susan said, the other two positions we've begun the advertising for, just because it is such a long process to get somebody in. And we did that so that the minute we get that TOD from Condot, which they said would come once we submit this draft, we'll be that much further along and that much closer to hiring. So to the other position that, this really came about as we got the timeline together. That was one of the attachments in the MOA. And once we laid out everything that has to happen in a pretty tight time frame, we were concerned that even with all the new staff on board, that we probably might not have enough people to get this all done on time and keep everything moving. And so that's where we came up with the idea of a special projects person, which would be a short-term position. Right now we're estimating it's probably through June 30th, 2023, because that's going to, as Susan mentioned, July 1, 2022 is when we plan to start operating as one district, but we still figured there's going to be a wind down period that we have to wind down the existing Middletown Transit District and kind of finish up some studies, finish up some activities to really make everything as one. Even though we might publicly be one, there'll still be some time to kind of finish up projects and get everything, again, all together. So rather than, because we wanted this to be, again, soon, and because it wasn't identified in the study, what we discussed was just both districts splitting the cost because we both have lots of funds available still due to the CARES Act funding received. Estuary still has a significant amount, well over $1 million in funds that we haven't programmed yet. And Middletown is in a similar situation. So we thought that being that it's a defined timeline, we've discussed many times, we don't want to use CARES Act money to commit us to anything long-term that we don't have long-term funding to sustain, but something that has a defined period we thought was a good use of the funds. So we did come up with a job description, and we estimate a salary range of somewhere in the neighborhood of about $60,000. Total cost to us, to two districts to share, is just around $90,000. So about $45,000, say $50,000 per district per year to fund this, and again for that defined period of about June 30th, 2023. Now, of course, we might say if things aren't probably wrapped up by then, we might decide to extend it by a month or so, a couple months, but we would not. One of the discussions we had too is, well, what if we decide that we need a position like this long term? At any point we can still go back to CONDOT and say, you know what, we really need another position, and try and negotiate to add a position. But we would have to come up with a long-term funding source. It wouldn't be CARES funding. So, we would advertise it as and we're working with the labor attorney to actually write up the exact language of how it should be written to make sure it is a contract type position that has a defined end date. So I don't know if there's any questions.
I have a question, but I don't know if it's really just for Joe. What's the status on acquisition of the area down by the medical group in Old Saybrook?
There's been no movement on that yet from the CONDOT. As far as I know, there's no funding in place for it yet. They moved really quickly on Middletown prior to even having the MOA signed, largely because the study identified that was going to be needed no matter what. Even if we didn't do this, they needed to buy that property. So they were more confident in buying that without an MOA in place. They haven't told me that they're waiting on the MOA for Westbrook, but I assume that's a big part of what, why they haven't moved on it yet, is they want to see the MOA done.
Who on board is the honcho on this thing?
On the property?
Yeah.
No one on the board side, largely because CONDOT's going to do the purchase themselves. But as soon as we have this MOA, maybe you want to talk, Susan, about what we've suggested?
The oversight.
Yes.
Yeah, the last section of the MOA it creates an expansion oversight committee, Peter, and that would have one representative from each district and one from DOT with Joe. That committee will meet regularly to see, to review the status of everything. If it's not satisfied that progress is being made or commitments are being made, then we will so notify the other parties and we will halt progress on the expansion. But it would really fall to the oversight committee to keep an eye on what the status is of the land acquisition, as well as a number of the other activities that are needed in order to implement this. If you haven't had a chance, take a look at the implementation plan. That is one of the appendices in the MOA, which Joe did. It's exhausting just to read it, much less do it. There's a study and a contract going out almost a couple of times, a month. And that's why this special projects manager concept came into fruition as a way to keep all these projects moving. And one of those projects will be keeping track of what the land acquisition status is.
Thank
And
you.
Susan, just to point out that, yes, the DOT will be acquiring the land, but it is our hope and hopefully their intent to turn that land over to us.
And that's also an item we put in the MOA.
That title would transfer to estuary
Correct.
of all of the district,
Everything,
All-
right?
okay.
All facilities.
every facility. Joe, does that include the bus terminal in Middletown as well?
So we have a separate section that says that part of the MOA is part of the responsibilities of Middletown is to transfer their assets to estuary and for CONDOT to approve it. So that's kind of separate, separately, since Middletown has title to their current facilities.
Mhm.
So, that will happen. It's the facilities that CONDOT is going to be purchasing and building. That is something we're negotiating for.
Thank you, Peter, though. That was a good question.
Thank you for a good answer.
So I think you need a vote, Susan, because this is coming under the MOA committee's recommends. So
Yes,
I'm going to suggest it goes back to you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments on the new position or other staffing issues? Okay, if none, we would like a motion as follows. To approve the establishment of a special projects manager to assist with the expansion of the Estuary Transit District, whose cost will be shared equally by Middletown Transit District and Estuary Transit District. May I have a motion to that effect?
So
Joan,
moved. So moved.
Second,
Peter, thank you. Further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you.
All right, taking the meeting back here. I don't think there's any other staffing discussion. I think we're done with that. And possible actions, we're done with that. Next steps we've discussed as far as submitting the MOA to the DOT with the cover letter. Hopefully they accept it as written. Sorry. Are there any other items that anyone would like to discuss? One question I have, and I don't think if it was addressed, then I apologize. But it's my understanding that once the MOA is signed, that Middletown and ETD will have to sit down and renegotiate our contracts with First Transit. Because they have contracts, we have contracts, obviously all of that will change. And so that isn't also considered a next step once everything is signed. Is that correct? Am I correct on all that? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Correct.
And Joe, I correct me if I'm wrong again. Did you give me the feeling that perhaps maintenance director position should possibly come from First Transit, or?
So we had discussed Susan and I discussed early on, would any of these new positions be First Transit, or would they all be hired in-house? And I said the one of the three that you could consider would be maintenance, because that is something that First Transit does often do. So, we can do like we've often done. We can do concurrently. We can continue the search. We can ask First Transit for a price, and so that we can at least evaluate who their candidate would be and what the cost would be. Hopefully they get something together really quickly, and we could weigh that with hiring our own, like we've been looking at. But hiring
What's
your own
your-
is always challenging. It's just like why we did the operations manager. It was tough on our own. Maintenance is often tougher. It's just a very specialized field, and getting a good maintenance manager is tough. And First Transit certainly has more resources than us for recruitment.
So what is your preference on moving forward with the maintenance director position?
Right now it's trying to get it the best qualified person as quick as possible. Whichever
Right.
route we do that. So I think it's worthwhile asking First Transit to put something together, and we can see which is best and evaluate that. And if we find someone we really like on our own, we can go that route. If we're not, we haven't wasted any time, and we've gotten them working out a proposal.
Any comments on that? I mean, I defer to Joe on how to hire somebody. Let's say you hire somebody, well, that's stupid. Never mind.
Leslie, all I would say is that I don't think we lose anything by asking First Transit for a proposal.
If they're fast.
That would include availability as well as all the costs associated with it. And then Joe can evaluate that with what he's finding in our own search.
So Joe,
Yeah, I will ask Nick to get a price together. I have a call with Nick tomorrow morning. So
okay, fine. But I think the priority from all of our standpoint is get somebody. If First
Yes.
Transit's gonna fart around with it, then
it's
not enough.
right. It's going to be. I'll explain that it has to be quick. That we're
Okay.
in a rush to get this done, and if we find someone first, that's the route we're going to go.
Very
And
good.
So
Okay,
put
we
it in
don't
their
have
court.
we don't have anything down here for new business, but is there anything else anybody would like to discuss at this point? If not, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't adjourn. Does that sound like a good idea? All right, Peter, I'd like to thank you for sticking with us. I know that you're on your way down to Washington DC to meet with President Biden to discuss Ninetown Transit's financing options. But thank you for sticking around.
I thought you'd have forgotten all that.
No, I'm not.
I'm gonna have to be a little more careful and less flippant, because actually it was not with the president, it was with the vice president.
Oh,
And on that note, I'm happy to adjourn.
okay. Is there a second?
Second,
Okay, in that case, I'm going to assume it's fine, and I will set the motion to adjourn, and I will see you all at our next whenever. Susan, Joan, Angus, David, Joe, thank you so much for getting us where we've gotten today. And I'll see you all later. Bye, everybody.
Suzanne, know if you need any